Welcome to another episode of RPGaymer. Today we're going to talk about Final Fantasy Renaissance with its creator, the wonderful Ozmo is here. How are you two doing today?
Hello.
How are you doing, my friend? So-
Ebony, ebony, ebony.
yeah, it's going to happen a lot
Yeah.
today.
Looney Tunes time. No, I'm doing very good. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to be here because, for anybody that knows, we get to talk about one of my favorite games of all time and the game that started it all. But before we get there, I want to talk about a little bit about you and start out with just like a little warm up question, just get our feet in with this little episode of what we're going to be covering today. So I just want to know, what are you playing right now that's like new and fun?
The only new-ish game that I'm playing right now is Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. I finally got around to playing it, so it's not like it's a replay or something. I think it came out, gosh, like a year ago
Yeah, it's been
at
it's
this
been
point,
like a
right?
little bit. I think like a year and a half. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Breath of the Wild was one of my favorite games that I've played in a long time, and so when Tears of the Kingdom came out, I was very excited to play it right away. I just didn't have the time. So yeah, now I'm trying to play it a little bit here and there when I've got a couple hours to kill at the end of the day or something. It's a great game for that, great casual play. But I'm loving it. So good. It's
Do
such a
you
good game.
enjoy the open world nature over the more like traditional streamline experience? Because I'm definitely team like I like the old way versus the new way, and I don't have any. I don't think the new way is bad, but I just prefer the old way more. What are your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I like both. I think both styles of game are a lot of fun. There's certain things that you gain from a really linear experience, especially in an RPG style game, where you can really tell a really concise story that way, and you can really control the player's experience and how that story is delivered. You lose some of that with the open world, and so that's one thing that's apparent in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom is the story kind of takes a back seat to all the exploration, but I, for one, love games that give me lots of exploration. I love to just, pick a direction on the map and just start walking, or in this case, gliding, or launching yourself into the air, whatever. And just seeing what I can find and finding, little random caves and things that, make you feel like you're discovering something that you're not supposed to, or you're the first person to find this thing because it seems so random and obscurely placed. I love like moments like that, and so games like this, there's just a ton of moments like that where you just get to find things, and that's so satisfying.
There, it resonates with our conversation when we had the creator of Final Fantasy Renaissance on here because he designed his game in a very similar way. Or sorry, Final Fantasy Renaissance, Final
I
Fantasy,
was gonna say,
sorry,
yeah.
Crystal Project. We have your
Gotcha.
Renaissance guy. Crystal Project creator. It's an open world RPG for people
Mm,
that don't know it, and it's the same kind of thing where there are a lot of experiences where you can platform and go around, and you find those little alcoves with chests in them and little rewards that, like you're saying, like it's just kind of cool to go and
yeah,
find on your own instead of being like, well, it's very obvious, like this is what they want me to do.
yeah.
Which I think that part is the best part of the new style Zelda. I think that is a lot of fun. For me, I just don't always know how I feel about the puzzle design, because I think there are often like 20 different solutions, and because there are 20
Mm,
different solutions, like it doesn't really feel like you have to try that hard to figure something out. Especially in
sure.
Echoes of Wisdom, like the near one, I felt like I was just kind of doing the same thing over and over again. Where I want to be
Mm.
challenged. Like I want there to be like fewer solutions, so that way you really have to think and formulate a plan.
Yeah, you walk into a puzzle and you go, okay, there is one solution. What is it? And that's
Hmm.
that's the fun, is finding how to solve that puzzle. I get you. Yeah.
Well, let's not talk about Zelda anymore and move over to you and your wonderful recreation. So, you being a game dev and whatnot, and taking a project like Final Fantasy Renaissance, I want to know a little bit of your background, like what got you into gaming and coding, and did you have a love of RPGs growing up like a lot of us did?
Well, I've been playing video games for as long as I can remember. The first video game system we had in our house was an Atari 2600, so that was my first experience with home consoles, and technically, I think that was actually my mom's Atari. I don't know if she got it before we were born, before she had kids, or if she got it shortly after. I have no idea, but we did have an Atari 2600 in the house that we would all play, including my mom, and that was a lot of fun. We eventually got a Nintendo, the original NES, and played a lot of Super Mario Brothers, and just giving my mom credit again for her gamer prowess here, being really a non-gamer for the most part. She was the first person in our house to figure out how to get to the end of the original Super Mario Brothers. If you remember
Ooh.
that final castle where you have to go through a specific pattern
Mm-hmm.
of going up and down
Because
over the
if not, it's an
different.
infinite loop, right? Like eventually
Yeah.
you're like, there's something going on here.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like my little kid brain did not recognize that. I didn't figure out that this was an infinite loop. Like I didn't know concepts like that, right? Yeah, I remember very clearly that our mom was the first one to get to the end, and she was really proud of that. And I was like, oh my god, I was in awe. I was like, my mom's a gamer. Uh, but yeah, so that was some of my early experience was, playing on the Atari, then the Nintendo, and on from there. I was mostly a Nintendo kid until PlayStation came out. As far as RPGs specifically, I think a lot of people, especially people that know me for Final Fantasy Renaissance, would be surprised to know that I did not get into RPGs until well into my teenage years. Um,
Which is quite a
the
gap, like considering, when you're talking about late Atari, early NES to
mhm.
probably, I'm guessing, PS1 based
Yeah,
on, yeah. So that's
yeah,
a
that
pretty
would have been
big gap.
PlayStation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So ironically, the first, I think it was the first RPG that I really significantly tried to spend time playing was Final Fantasy VII. So as strange as that may sound, my entry into the Final Fantasy series was FF7, the one that I think most people would associate with the more casual fans, right? Like of course everybody got into the series at FF7, but there's people that were around for decades before that are the true fans, right?
It's so
Uh,
hard to think of that now because I talk to we have a lot of younger members in our Discord, and for them, like, that game is 10, or for them that game is 13.
mm,
And then I feel like for gamers like us, who are a little bit older, a little bit more masters in our gaming experience, like some of us
mm.
might have that opinion of, oh yeah, 7 is late, but for some of it, seven's like could be really
That's
early
true.
still
It's
too.
it's
So
old, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so that was actually the first RPG that I remember playing, and as crazy as this sounds, I remember specifically before that just not being interested in RPGs. Is quite the opposite. I would watch friends who were really into, the Fire Emblem games, or again, I probably wasn't watching Final Fantasy at the time, but whatever RPGs they were playing, I thought it looked so weird. It looked boring to me. I was like, what is this system where you input commands and your character just swings a weapon, swings a sword back and forth, and an enemy across the screen takes damage, and there's no animations because these were old RPGs at the
Uh-huh.
time, the older turn-based RPGs, and it just did not resonate with me. And it wasn't until we got Final Fantasy VII, when the PlayStation 1 was still relatively early, right? I think when that came out.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was
Um,
like among the first handful of RPGs to come out on the PS1.
yeah, I figured it must have been because I remember our family. I've got a brother and sister, and we got a PlayStation with a few games, including Final Fantasy VII, for Christmas that year. And so that was our first PlayStation, and I now had this RPG game that I didn't have a lot of games to play. That was the newest game that I had, and so I finally just gave it a shot, and I fell in love with it and never looked back. And that's almost all I play now is RPGs. So it's funny. I did a complete 180 on the whole thing on RPGs at that time.
I feel like you and I may have talked about this in our pre-meeting, but it's so strange to hear a lot of people who are so open to going backward, because I feel like there's such a resistance to it now, where like some of the classic games are just like, I see it from a distance, I appreciate it from a distance, but it might be too classic for me. And then you have
Mm.
people like me where it's like Final Fantasy 1 and on, but like to go 7 and be like, I love this, I want to go backwards, instead of like, I want to go forwards, and actually still be able to appreciate those things,
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah, and that's what I did tell you, I think, previously, didn't I? That when after I started with FF7, I had a friend who, he was playing through it at the same time as well because it was the new game, and he had been playing the Final Fantasy games for, since he was a little kid, and he had played the older ones, and he had a copy of FF1 on the NES, and when I was getting close to the end of FF7, he told me, well, if you like Final Fantasy VII, you should play the other ones. You should play the older ones. And he lent me his copy of FF1. So I went straight from FF7 to FF1 on the
Wow.
NES. And I loved it. So, that just goes to show that these games are timeless. I
Hmm.
think, if you have an open mind, if you don't need flashy graphics and cutscenes and voice acting and all that kind of stuff, that we have nowadays, there's these games are great. They stand the test of time. But yeah, I went directly back to FF1 and just started playing through all the Final Fantasy games from that point on as in sequential order as much as I could at the time. It took a while before some of them came to the US still, but yeah, I fell in love with the series at that point, and I wanted more, in whatever form it took.
Well, and I think that kind of speaks to when we think of Final Fantasy Renaissance and the things that you incorporated and the more and whatnot. But we'll get to that in a little bit. I think I just want to touch on FF1 itself now. And I think I've said this anytime Final Fantasy comes up on our podcast that it has the biggest home in my heart because, it's the first RPG I ever played. I think I was 4 when I played it. I was very, very young. I think it had only been out for a year or two. Very much so in love with it. Part of the reason why I got interested in fantasy, in reading, even though there's not a lot of reading, at that age, being so young, it pushed me to learn and be interested in fantasy worlds instead of just going outside and playing with my friends and whatnot.
Mm.
But I'm curious for you, what is about Final Fantasy 1 specifically that remains so captivating and timeless? Because I think you're right. And definitely for base Final Fantasy 1. I don't want to talk about the iterations that have come after, but for base Final
Hmm.
Fantasy, what is it about it for you?
I think that game, the way that they designed it, and I know a lot of it was just due to limitations at the time. Like you said, there's only so much reading, there's only so much dialogue and stuff. Every character you talk to typically just has, one thing to say, or at least
Mm-hmm.
one thing to say at any given time. And the story is it's delivered through through dialogue with the NPCs throughout the game, but you don't have cutscenes, you don't have all these you know full motion video kind of things, like you have now. I think that just those limitations and how the game is so simple compared to what a lot of RPGs are nowadays, more modern ones. It just that's I guess the word I would stick to is its simplicity. The game just really lends itself to being able to be played however you want. Not only can you create whatever party uh, you want to play as, whatever job classes you can do 4 red mages if you want. You can do a
Which you
monk if
should.
you
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. 4 red mages is a lot of magic.
that
That's a lot of shopping at the
that's a
magic
lot of
shops.
shopping.
It's an expensive party, yes. Uh, but you have complete freedom over how you experience the game, or a lot of freedom, I should say, over how you experience the game, and you still have to do certain things in sequential order and whatnot, but it's just kind of I love the open endedness of it, where
Hmm.
they just drop you in front of a town, in front of a castle, and don't tell you what to do and just let you explore. It's kind of like that Zelda thing, like we were talking about before, with a more open game. And this is, a much, much smaller game compared to that, but it still has that openness where you feel like you can just walk and see what you can find, and that sense of exploration.
I think I see that and I completely agree with that. And also on top of that too, just seeing developers, especially looking back, make the most of what they could on a system like the NES where there wasn't really there's not much going on behind the scenes on that system. Like the limitations were pretty huge.
Mm.
Like I only learned this recently, and it makes complete sense that all monsters could only have three colors to
Yeah.
them to not like basically use up all the memory. Is that right?
Yeah,
Uh,
basically, yeah. I think a lot of the design decisions that they made were for memory limitations for that reason.
like
Yeah.
they could have black because black was the background, and I think they
Hmm.
could have white because white was always on the screen too. But then they only could have
Yeah.
like a couple other colors.
Yeah.
So it's just those little like charming things to think like you got this fantasy adventure that had its little problems, had little bugs and whatnot, and a little sluggish, but still like so creative and charming. Like the music is super charming. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. There's just something about those old games, and I think you're right with the simplicity. Like you think of a lot of people's favorites when they talk about different series. A Link to the Past is typically, which I know it's not the first Zelda, but it's typically people's favorite Zelda. Or Final Fantasy One, it has that huge charm. Pokemon, the first
Hmm.
Pokemon, super charming. It's what really pulled a lot of non-gamers in, like people who probably
Yeah.
don't game anymore. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, I loved Pokemon because it was just so simple." So I think
Yeah.
that is just one of the beauties of it because I look at future installments and there's so much going on, and sometimes your mind just like turns off to some of those things. I'm not sure if you've ever played an
Hmm.
RPG before where there are so many systems that you like miss something and then you get really frustrated because like you
Oh,
didn't yeah,
absolutely.
you didn't know that it was going on, and
Yeah.
there was a tutorial for it, but it's like, but I like, there's just so,
Sure.
how would I know, there's so much going on.
Well, and when games get so complex, then they get stuck in that problem where they have to put in tutorials, and some games do it better than others do, and they weave them into the gameplay and the storytelling and everything. If they're clever, they find ways to do that. But yeah, nobody wants to just sit through a ton of tutorials, so you try to get through it as quickly as you can, oftentimes, and then you get in that position where now you missed something because you were trying to get through the tutorial and then you feel lost. Yeah, that's really frustrating.
Um, so speaking of keeping things simple, and whatnot, you decided to recreate Final Fantasy One from scratch. What made you want to go that route as opposed to just like making a hack? Because I know that there are a couple of like fan hacks out there
Mm.
that I wouldn't say they've done something similar, but I mean like have at least at the very least incorporated a couple new classes as opposed to just like overhauling the full world. So why did you decide to go
Right.
that route?
So it really just came from a place of wanting to make a game. I had never made an RPG before. I had just come off of this was, like 8 years ago, I think, when I started this. I had just come off of a project with a small team of people where we were working on like a platformer game. It was like a Metroidvania style
Cool.
platformer game. It's called Crystal Catacombs. It's on Steam if you want to check it out. But yeah, that was some time ago. We were working on that, and we got to the end of that project, and I really wanted something else to work on. And I shouldn't say kind of, I really wanted to work on something by myself because I had just come out of that team environment, which is, great. Collaboration is great, and you can come up with a lot of really cool stuff working with a team of people, and push each other, and there's a lot of creativity that comes out of that.
Well, just having the
Um,
reliance of someone else, like if you can't do, someone else can be
yeah,
a really great thing, whether that's ideas or deving or whatever. Like that, just the team
yeah.
aspect can be great, but that also doesn't always challenge you because you can pass it off to someone else, right?
True, true. But yeah, everyone has their own strengths and everything, and
Hmm.
that's where working in a team really really is nice. But I found myself just wanting what you don't get as much from the team aspect is really being able to move at your own pace and develop
Mm.
at your own pace and, whatever that may be. And so I was looking for a project that I could do by myself. I really just wanted to work on a side project. I say side project, and it turned into like this massive thing. But that's really where it started. And as far as why recreate it from scratch, first of all, I actually, to be honest, was not really aware of ROM hacks at the time. I
Oh,
I think I'd heard of them. I've heard of people remaking games or tweaking them with ROM hacks, but I didn't know anything about the Final Fantasy One ROM hack, like community out there. I really wasn't aware of that stuff, and so I was really just looking for something I could do. I wanted to learn how to make an RPG. I wanted to practice it in some way, and Final Fantasy One just seemed like a natural sandbox to play with because this is a game that seems so simple on the surface, and it's one that I was very familiar with already. So I said, well, this is a game that I could take, from start to finish. I know how it's supposed to work. I know how it's supposed to look and feel, and I can just get the art assets from online, download all the audio files, and then I just need to figure out how to code it and how to put it all together. And so it just really seemed like a fun challenge, and I wanted to see if I could do it.
I think that's super smart in a lot of ways because I know, like, being on my own game dev journey right now, a lot of things you hear are start simple, and I'm sure that there's a lot of depth and complexity to Final Fantasy One behind the scenes, but at the same time, if you compare it to a lot of the things that people want to do with games, it's a lot more streamlined and curated. But I back to fan hacking. I feel like I can't imagine how overwhelming it would be to go into someone else's code and come up with your own additions that aren't going to break anything
Right.
versus starting scratch and at least it's all the things you did so you're familiar with it, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, God, yeah, trying to even follow someone else's code a lot of times is a monumental task. So that's yeah, and I'm really a do it yourself kind of person anyway, and I like I don't even use a lot of third party tools or anything like that to do things that I'm trying to do when I'm doing game dev because I want to know 100% what the code is doing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to fully understand it. I don't want to be stuck with some little black box that I've, you know, imported into a project and I don't know how it works. And then if I need to make changes around it, I'm just kind of stuck.
You
So
don't want the
I
saber
really
spell to
like to
not
build it
work
all.
and
Yeah. Exactly.
so in terms of the creation of this game, there's got to be hurdles, whether that's fixing some of the bugs that existed, kind of like I was saying with some of the spells not working, or maybe even balancing what you incorporated, whether that's design wise of some of the new classes or what they did in the grand aspect or like overall in the game. What were some of the hurdles or some of the trickier things that you found when you were designing this?
Mm. Um, let's see. Well, I can tell you one that jumps out in my mind right now is something that really caught me by surprise because it's something that I think a lot of people don't really notice that much, or you kind of take for granted when you play the game. So if you think about when you open any menu in the game or
Mm-hmm.
walk into a shop, they kind of do the same thing. There's this transition effect that they use. This is going to be really specific and strange, but uh,
Well, it's almost like going
so
to
what?
a battle screen, right?
Little bit. So there's a transition where say you hit the menu button before the menu actually pops up. If you can think about how this works in the game, there's a flashing of different colors. So
Oh, yeah.
basically,
Mm-hmm.
if you're you know what I'm talking about. So if you're standing in the town, you're looking at all the shops and NPCs walking around and everything. What happens is all the NPCs vanish suddenly and really quickly, and this happens within about like a second, maybe a half a second. That entire background with the grass and trees and shops and all that stuff flickers a number of different colors. It actually goes through, I want to say, about 8 different colors, but really quickly. So you've got red, green, blue, orange, whatever.
Yeah.
That's sort of like, it looks like an overlay kind of over all of that background stuff. It flickers through all those real fast and then it pops up with the menu. And then when you leave the menu, it does something similar, but it's actually a slightly different sequence. So it kind of does, it's almost a reverse order flashing through those colors before it drops back to, the basic background color palette and all the NPCs are back and stuff. That flickering color change transition effect took me literally a month
Oh my
to get
god.
working. Yeah. So, yeah, that really caught me by surprise.
As in, you wanted
And
to add that to the experience to keep it traditional,
yeah. Yeah, cuz remember I'm recreating the whole thing from scratch. So,
right?
I can't just while I'm developing and I get to the point where, oh, I need to open the main menu, so let me write the code to make it so the player can push a button and open the main menu. I can't just call some function that does color change flash. I have to write that. I have to figure out how to achieve that effect and code it myself. So that was a big challenge. And uh, one reason why it really caught me by surprise is because I thought, well, I'm recreating a Nintendo game. I'm recreating an original NES game from the 1980s. Why would this be so hard to do? They did it back then with this limited hardware and whatnot. And I came to find out as I researched the way that some of this stuff worked, the way they designed some of these things, stuff like that color change flashing effect is sort of a happy accident that they ran into.
That's what I was wondering too. Like, how intentional was it?
Yeah, so some of this stuff, some of these effects that they used were really somewhat accidental, and the reason that they were able to do it was because, and I don't fully understand this, so I can't explain it as well as some people could who have written things about this online. But the way that that game worked on that original hardware was they had to store a lot of things in memory in a very particular way, and when it came to the graphics, they would store those things in such a way where if you they call it bit shifting. If you shift the memory location of that image slightly or something like that, again, I'm not great at explaining this.
Sure.
Um, it basically just changes the color palette slightly. So basically, what they're doing is they're taking a single image and then they're modifying something about the memory location of the color palette that's being used to render that thing to the screen, and they're just making like a slight alteration that causes a green pixel to become orange and a white pixel to
Okay.
become blue and stuff like that. So it's taking all of the colors and the where those colors are stored in memory is a better way to look at it, and just it's just stepping over by like one memory location to cause each of the different colors to shift on the screen to a different color. I could not find a way, because I'm building this in Unity, that's the game engine or development engine that I used for this. I could not find a way to achieve that bit shift color change effect in Unity. Maybe there exists a way to do it, but I couldn't figure it out. So I had to find my own way of doing it. And so literally every map that you see in the game in Final Fantasy Renaissance, I have at least 8 different versions of that same map where I manually recolored them to match what they looked like on the NES, as close as
Wow.
I could at least. So it's actually playing an animation that's flipping through all of those different alternate colored versions of those backgrounds. That was the only way I could find to do it, and that was time consuming.
Why do you think the minor details mattered so much? Was it like an homage thing, or
Yeah, yeah. For me, I really from early on in this project, I really wanted to pay homage or pay tribute to the original game in a very big way. I didn't want this to, you know, I didn't want it to look or feel like most other fan versions of games where or even remakes. Like Square Enix has remade Final Fantasy 1 so many times
yeah?
and they've changed it significantly each time in many cases. I didn't want to do that because, first of all, as just part of my challenge to myself, I wanted to recreate the original game. So I wanted it to still look and feel like the original game on the original hardware, so you could have that nostalgic experience of replaying the original game. And then eventually, I started adding new features to it. But even with the new features, the new job classes and whatnot, I've always tried uh, to keep myself reined in a bit from changing the game. I feel like I'm adding to the game, and I've made some quality of life improvements, but I've always wanted it to still look and feel like the original game, because that was my goal in the very beginning, was to recreate the original game with some new job classes and new, concepts, new spells and abilities and things that exist later in the other Final Fantasy games, and just see what it would be like to play with those in this game, because the original game is such a perfect sandbox for exploring things like that, for adding on stuff. So
Well, and speak thinking from your perspective, and I mean, obviously, like you can deny this or agree with this, but if you create it in that base level of exactly what it is, and then you've accomplished that, then you get that challenge of okay, what would it look like if I made these changes, and then you're just continuing
mm-hmm.
to learn as you're making those pivots of okay, but if I threw the dragoon in here, what would that look like, because obviously that's not true to the original game, but what would it look like
Mm-hmm.
in the context of this? So like
Yeah,
you're taking the skills of what you learned by like keeping it one to one and then adapting that in your own image. So I think that's really
yeah.
cool.
Well, and it's an interesting challenge that it presents where, as you said, I'll add a job class like Dragoon, and well, what's the Dragoon known for? It's known for the jump ability. Well, how do I convey the jump ability in this game where you don't have these complex battle animations and stuff like that? So that's always
I
been a
don't know.
challenge throughout this
The
project.
Dark Knight has a pretty cool attack animation. I'm very happy with how
Yeah.
that one goes.
Oh, that was a fun one too. You're talking about how he
Like
grabs his great sword
goes
and
back and forth.
swings it
Yes,
around back and
I
forth.
love
I'm
that.
so I'm so glad that conveyed as well as it did, because when I thought of it, I was like, "Oh, I like 'cause I knew I wanted to do a different animation for the great sword. I didn't want it to just be swing swing, especially because it's a great sword. So the way that the other characters walk out with a normal sword and they swing it and it goes really fast, just like a
Yeah,
little flicker. Boop, boop, boop. I didn't want to do that because it wouldn't make sense with a great sword. So I thought, well, if only I could convey that he's swinging it around,
and then
real
the
wide and
big
real big, and then
clunk.
just slams it
Yeah.
down to the ground. And yeah, and so I was really happy that I came up with something that still used the same number of frames of animation. It's still very basic. He has, instead of swinging the sword forward and back, he just, is holding it out, and I use the 2 frames of animation because that's all they have is just 2 frames of animation for the attack, and I use that to make him just flip back and forth, which
Hmm.
gives that appearance like he's spinning around if you have an imagination at least, and then ends it with the driving it down into the ground instead of his idle animation. Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that, and I'm really glad people could understand what I was going for there.
Those are the little details that I love because it's exactly what I got from it. And it is interesting how simple it is to do something like that too. Like if you know about mirroring when you're doing pixel art and how useful that can be, because
Oh yeah.
what is it? The original movement in the Final Fantasy games is just the character mirrored back and forth, and that's where the step comes from. It's not actually two different sprites going up. It's just the mirror of their feet going like
Yeah,
that. It's
for the
so
most part, yeah.
yeah, it's so neat to think of like the magic, you know what I mean? The little
Oh
things.
yeah. Yeah, little things like that are it's really fun to find creative solutions for things like that to achieve that effect with, in some really simple way, like you said, just mirroring an image. I did the same thing with Dancer. When the Dancer, if you play as Dancer job class and she goes out to do one of her dances, she steps forward and then she just flips back and forth a couple times,
Hmm.
It's like, she's dancing.
What
But that was an interesting challenge in this game because this game has so many limitations, especially if you're trying to stick true to the original and not really completely change things. You want it to fit within the mechanics of the original game. That's definitely posed a huge challenge for some of the job classes I've added, because there's things you can do with some of these job classes in later games that really just don't fit in Final Fantasy One, and so you have to come up with other ways, like even just adding new abilities to some of the existing original 6 classes in this game. The thief, I would have loved to give the thief a steal ability, but I was like, monsters don't carry items. They don't
then
drop
you
any
then you'd
items.
have to do that for every single
I'd have
monster
to
and
add
consider
items for
it,
every
and
monster.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
And then that significantly changes the game. So I did not want to do that. So yeah, there were a lot of challenges when adding new things to make it actually work in this world.
well, we're here. Let's talk about the classes.
Yeah.
This was the instant hook for me. When I heard about this, like, and I honestly can't remember who posted about your game. I'm super happy that they did, obviously. But anytime you're like, "Hey, I'm taking an old Final Fantasy game or just an old game in general, and I'm throwing in some new classes," I am there for it.
Nice.
There, what what went into creating the classes that we know that weren't in the original game into this Final Fantasy 1 space, and then also you can hit this after what went into making the old classes still appealing enough to still want to
Mm,
play them, because I know personally on my first playthrough I didn't touch any of the old classes, like been there done that. I'm just doing new ones, and then my second time around I did decide like, oh, I'm gonna do the thief and red mage because red mage favorite class with blue mage,
mm-hmm.
but thief is a ton of fun to play in this one. So
Yeah.
my twofold question there, like what went in with the new to make them fit, and then what made how did you go
Yeah.
about making the original still interesting?
So with the new job classes, like I said, there's definitely a challenge to making them fit in this game. I think I'm trying to remember back to the very first like 6 new job classes I added. I tried to pick ones that I didn't think I would need to dramatically change anything about the game to make them fit.
Like
Or
Dragoon is pretty straightforward class to throw
yeah, and
in.
Dragoon, yeah, he was actually one of the later ones I put. I mean, not one of the later ones I put in the grand scheme of things, but he was one of the later of the 6 new ones. Um, and he's mostly just a damage dealer, so he doesn't get too crazy. He's got the jump ability. I just had to get a little bit creative about animations with that one, but yeah, he doesn't really, dramatically change the game experience. Evoker or Summoner
Yeah,
does.
oh yeah, absolutely.
That was probably I feel like of those of the first 6 that I added, that was the most time consuming
What were the first six?
because so the first 6 I'm looking over off screen here at my business card because I put the first 6 on there. That's my reminder. So not necessarily in this order did I add them, but I've got Trainer, which becomes Beastmaster, the Blue
Mm-hmm.
Mage, Dancer, Evoker or Summoner, and then Geomancer and Lancer. And actually, now that I remember, Geomancer was a lot of work. So I'm not sure. It's a toss up between Evoker and Geomancer, quite honestly, because there's a lot of new content that I had to add for both of those.
I'm surprised Time
Um,
Age wasn't in that list, just because I mean, like, it
mm,
is kind of, it does have new spells, but at the
mhm.
very least, like, it's a pivot from the other casters. You know what I mean? Because the caster base is already there,
Yeah.
that you don't really have to worry about some of the other features.
Well, so the magic system itself was already there, yeah, but then Time Mage has some crazy
It
spells
does.
that really dramatically change how you play the game. So yeah, Time Mage was a lot
Okay.
actually, and he was so much that he had his own release. Time Mage was the only job class that I released with the next major expansion or,
Oh
or update that
wow.
I made to the game after I got it complete with the 6 original classes, the 6 new classes that I just mentioned, and I got the whole game playable from start to finish. That was version 1.0. That was when I considered the game officially complete and released, but I still plan to add more stuff to it after that. But at that point, I was like, okay, it's technically kind of done. Then Time Mage was the next major addition that I made, and he was a standalone just because that was such an involved undertaking to get him to work. And if I don't know if you've played the Time Age yet, but
Yeah,
there's a lot
actually,
of sequence breaking kind of stuff. Yeah, it
like
was very
resetting
interesting.
the battle. So like my first
Yeah.
team in Renaissance was Dancer, Dark Knight, Time Mage, and Blue Mage.
Mm.
I went with healing was not to be found for the most part.
Yeah, not a lot.
Which is funny because I mean, actually, Final Fantasy One isn't too bad of a game for needing healing unless you're in a boss battle. Which some bosses you can
Hmm.
just like decimate in the first round or
Yeah.
two. But I can see what you mean. Like I feel like they're relatively complex classes. Like thinking of the dance percentages,
Mm-hmm.
or like doing the time reset for time magic. It seems like from a coding standpoint, especially compared to the base classes, that seems like it'd be a lot more work.
Some of it is the time resetting piece for Time Mage. You're talking about his egress job class ability, which
Hmm.
is a nod to what is it, Shining Force? I
Yeah, yeah,
think
yeah,
had
yeah. The
had
main
egress.
character.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I loved that mechanic so much. So when I was working on Time Age, I was like, I have to put that in there. So ironically, if you look back at some of the older Final Fantasies that do have things like Time Age, I want to say it's FF5 Time Age that did have a spell that reset the battle, and it
Hmm.
was just called Return was it?
I think it might be Return. It's
I
hard to
think it
tell
was
because
Return.
I've like most freshly is the Pixel remaster, for me. So like
Hmm.
it's they always change the names and whatnot. I'm still a Fire 2
Yeah.
guy. I'm not really a Fire guy personally, but but yeah, I think you're right. I think it's Return.
Yeah, so they had that as a time age spell, and I was like, well, if I'm being authentic to Final Fantasy terminology, I should call this Return, but I really wanted to throw in a Shining Force reference, so so I called it Egress and just made it a job class ability instead. But that was surprisingly easy to implement actually. In the background, all that's happening there is when you enter a battle, I just added some code that basically does a soft save. So it's
Oh,
creating
okay.
a temporary save state in the background at the start of the battle, and then if you use egress, it just loads that save state immediately at the start
Well, that
of
makes sense. That
battle.
yeah, that
Yeah,
that makes complete sense.
yeah, that's all it is. So that was surprisingly easy. Some of the other stuff is more challenging. You mentioned dancer. The dancer. It, in the UI and the user interface of the game, there you see a lot of differences. It wasn't too terrible to do in the background, but it definitely was a departure from the way that other classes work. I basically hijacked the magic system for her, and instead of having, spell uses, you've got these success chances based on her current bravery level and stuff like that. And so I had to kind of tweak the UI to show percentages instead of magic castings and stuff. So yeah, there's definitely some work that goes into that.
I really love new mechanics like that because I think it adds a lot of excitement to the game. But I'm also happy that you decided not to stray away from spell slots because I don't think Final Fantasy is exciting when and not Final Fantasy 1, but I say like Final Fantasies, the spectrum of the series are as
Hmm.
exciting when you get your newest biggest spell and that's all you have to use. I think the idea
Right.
of spell slots adds a little bit of a risk system. Like I have these big spells, but I can only use them so many times. Thinking of like
Hmm.
in the context, my character is going to get exhausted from using those, but they can still cast these weaker spells on a whim because you think of games like Final Fantasy 6, and once you get Ultima, you just cast Ultima. Like you don't need to
Right.
do anything else. So I love that about this game where some older spells will always be useful, especially the way that you've created the status effect spells and whatnot.
Mm.
But thinking of the time mage, and is it Mark? Is that the name of the spell? Where
Yep.
like you're bringing in this Mark system to like continuously do damage and how you can add to it. Like it's
Yeah.
cool thinking of that. Like, oh, I can use my older spells and still have an advantage.
Which is a reference to Slay the Spire. I don't know if you ever played
Oh
that
yeah,
one. They
all the
had
time.
they had a mark spell that worked very much the same way, and I loved that. So yeah, there's a lot of little references to other games thrown in here. I think all developers like to do that. When you're working on a
Hmm.
project and you have the ability to put in little nods and things to other games that you've played. That's always a lot of fun. So I've definitely done that here as well.
Um, let's hit on the summoner and the thief before we move on over to the original classes. Well, thief
Hmm.
is still original class, but what you did to them adds so much more to the game, especially for people that know the game off like the back of their hand.
Yeah, the
Like
thief feels like a new class, doesn't it?
it completely does. Like it still plays the same in combat for the most part,
Oh
but
yeah.
like outside of combat, the what is it? Hot holds searching item minigame is so much
Mm.
fun and really encourages you to look so much more in the areas that you feel like to find actually useful cool things.
Hmm. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun to do. So the thief. for anyone that played the original a lot, I think most people are aware that the thief was widely considered the weakest character, kind of the least useful character. He's not great in combat. He was supposed to be really good at running, but there's some bugs with the
Yeah, there
running
are
system
bugs
in the
there.
original game, so he wasn't even as great at running as he should be. He never gets any, well, in the original game there were no job class abilities. That's something I added. But he doesn't have magic spells, at least not until he becomes ninja. And then at that point, are you really using, the level 1, level 2 magic spells? So he was really a disappointing class for most
He's
people.
like the
And
budget
I did,
class, like not maybe in between the
yeah.
monk and the fighter like budget.
Yeah, he's an in between. That once you get a decent ways into the game, you just feel stuck with him. You're like, oh, I got this guy. I guess I'll try to kill something. If the warrior misses, then maybe maybe I'll get
Yeah.
lucky if the fighter misses. So yeah, he really got the short end of the stick as far as design in the original game and implementation. So when I was thinking of things that I could do to make him like you said, keep pace with the newer job classes. That was something that the additions of new job abilities to the original 6 classes came out of necessity after I started adding the new classes,
Hmm.
because the new classes obviously are going to way outshine the originals if I don't do something to them. So that was where I had to kind of bend my sort of rules about not wanting to change the original game, just wanting to improve upon it. Adding things like new ways to play the original 6 classes was a little bit tough for me, but I was like, I think I have to. If I'm adding new job classes to this game and I want these guys to be at all fun compared to them, I have to give them something. So yeah, when I was adding new stuff to the thief in particular, like I mentioned before, I couldn't just give him a steal ability because I'd have to completely retool how monsters work. They'd have to drop items, they'd have to, have things that could be stolen from them, and that's just, a very different system than the basic battle system in the original game where all you get is gold and experience. So I didn't want to change that. So I gave him the mug ability where he could get extra gold at least.
Hmm.
So that gives him a new thing to do in combat. And then that, like you mentioned, the search ability, the kind of hot cold finding items thing, just it screamed thief. I was like, this is the perfect thing to give him, which I was really excited about because it doesn't do anything to his combat ability. He's still a mediocre, combatant that only gets access to a handful of mediocre weapons, mediocre swords for the most part. And so I didn't have to change any of that, but I could still make him really useful outside of battle. And that kind of experience of coming up with a way to make a job class fun in one aspect of the game and not another, where yeah, in combat he's still kind of disappointing, but he's so useful outside of combat. That really gave me a lot of ideas for a lot of the newer job classes that I added after that. So I started adding more world abilities and things like that, where characters could do things outside of combat that made them way more interesting.
So did the thief come
Even
before the evoker then? Like which inspired which in
Yeah,
terms of those two?
I had a lot of my ideas for the evoker early on, actually, because summoner is one of my favorite job classes. After red mage, summoner is the next
Good
one for
choice.
me. So I always have to have one of those two if I'm playing a new Final Fantasy, if given the choice. But so a lot of the ideas for evoker or summoner I had in my head, and a lot of it's based on the way it works in other Final Fantasy games. You go into some alternate dimension dungeon where you have to fight the Esper or Avatar or whatever you want to call them to get the ability to summon them. So I didn't really have to come up with too much new stuff there because that sort of material was already written for me, so to speak. But
Was there ever the
um,
thought of throwing in new dungeons, or do you think that would have like really broken the original experience?
I mean, it crossed my mind. I know that they've added extra like challenge dungeons and stuff to
So
some versions of Final Fantasy One.
yeah, the GVA versions
Mm-hmm.
have like extra dungeons every time you beat one of the four fiends, but they're very
Yeah.
upsetting because if you do them right away, like once they
Mm-hmm.
unlock, which you can, the rest of the game is seem like there's no challenge
It's
because you've
trivial.
leveled, yeah, and you get such good equipment, you're over
Yeah.
leveled, so I
Yeah.
think it depends on how you do it. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean I don't even know if I would say I was tempted to put things like that in, but it did cross my mind just because, well, yeah, later versions of Final Fantasy 1 have added new dungeons, but I have the power to do it here. Why shouldn't I? And part of the reason was exactly what you said, that I didn't want them to completely outclass the rest of the game and make things seem trivial. Another reason, to be quite honest, was I never finished playing through the Dawn of Souls version, and I didn't actually play through those dungeons, so I know of them and I know of some of the problems with them, but I wasn't intimately familiar with them enough to feel like I could do them justice to add them to this game. So I really just stuck with what I knew, which was the original game. So, stuff that they've added in pixel remasters, I'm not as familiar with. Stuff that they've added in, even like the PlayStation 1 version, which I did play through once a long time ago because they had an MP based magic system and I wanted to see what that felt like. Um, they made a number of changes in that version of the game, and those aren't the version that I remember. So I really just tried to stick with the original core game as much as possible. Another reason is adding new dungeons is a lot of work.
yeah.
You got all new background images, maps and everything that you got to put in there, and you got to populate all those map tiles, and it's more memory. It's more stuff that the game is storing and keeping track of and everything. Yeah, I didn't think that the game needed it.
I think doing what you did for the evoker was really smart. Like you're saying, you go into like basically the upside down from Stranger Things to find
Uh-huh.
these
Yeah.
summons, and you have just like a little mini map to run through.
Yeah.
I think it was wise because like you're saying, I didn't feel like it was breaking the experience. I feel like I got very broken when I would get hit by their attack going in, but
Okay, so yeah, I've got a couple things to say here. So
yeah.
so first of all, with going into those dungeons, and like you mentioned, it's like the upside down from Stranger Things. It's like this twisted alternate version of dungeons in the original game. So this was a fun little creative challenge that I think you'll appreciate. As far as finding little tricks to achieve things, like we talked about earlier, with finding tricks to make a simple animation look different, stuff like that. Um, all of those, I call them the astral zones, the
Hmm.
astral plane zones. All of those astral zones are the exact same zone that you were just walking around in,
Yeah,
but obviously, I've turned off all of the NPCs and changed the music and stuff like that. But that background image that was used for each of them, I didn't need to create, or I should say map, the map that you're on. I didn't have to create a new image for those maps. Going back to what I was saying earlier with that whole,
the
excuse me,
color.
that whole screen flickering.
Uh
Yeah,
huh.
exactly. So those different color transition frames that are part of that animation, I already had those. I had created all those alternate colored versions of all the maps. So basically, I just picked like the purple frame for the most part from each of those maps. So if you're in, Coneria, and you go in the town and you go into the astral version of Coneria, it's just the purple frame from that transition animation,
That makes
and
so
I just
much
used
sense.
that
Yeah.
as the background. So that was fun, and the music itself. Some people picked up on this actually, but it took a while. The background music in all of the astral zones is literally just the town theme song, like
Yeah.
what plays in Coneria or any of the other main towns. It's just the town theme song slowed down as much as possible,
It
so it
makes it
has this
really creepy.
eerie,
Yeah.
ominous sound. Yeah, exactly. And same thing with the battle music. It's just the same battle music that you hear throughout the whole game, but when you fight that astral boss that you're gonna get as a summon, it's the same battle music slowed way down, so it sounds extra creepy and stuff. so that was a fun thing to come up with ways to make it feel like it's brand new content, but just kind of borrowing from the same assets that were already in the game and just modifying them in some way.
It's clever.
Um,
I felt like that was definitely a clever way just to do it all, because I understand in a game like this, and especially keeping it to the tradition of what it was, you're gonna go to a shop and you're gonna buy spells. But if everything was like that, I don't think it would have been as exciting. And I think that's why
mm,
like Bard, Evoker, Dancer, it's cool that they have their own acquisition, and like it's contextual in a way, you know what I mean? Like thinking of this
yeah,
astral plane to get summon monsters is cool. You know, dancers talking to dancers and having little requirements, almost like side quests, or a big fat bill, a
yeah,
bill that you have to pay, you know, like it's I
yep,
think those are really good ways, again, just making things feel fresh but still feeling like this is the core game. So I'm
yeah.
curious. So I've now, I'm on my second playthrough. This one is Evoker, Thief, Red Mage, and Trainer. Loving Trainer
Okay.
a lot more than I thought I would. I was very skeptical at first. It's like, okay, I get it now. Like I figured you wouldn't have done it if you if there wasn't some creative useful twist to it. I'm like, well, this class is actually really
hmm
useful. What did you
mm.
do to like the base for, I'll say, like monk, fighter, black and white mages? Because I think
Oh,
red,
so you haven't played them yet, have you?
no, I haven't. I think red mage will always
Mm.
be like interesting, useful, and I mean, yes, it's my favorite
Yeah.
class, but it just fills a niche really easily. And I feel like we've already hit thief, so we can kind of like
hmm
take that one out. But those four, I've read about it.
Okay.
Someone on like Reddit kind of did the post, but like what went into making them a little bit more exciting? Because I feel like they are in the base game very specific on what they do. You know, like
Right.
heals, magic damage, lots of hits and lots of damage,
hmm
or lots of defense and lots of damage.
Yeah. 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 So let's see. So I'll take fighter first. So fighter or warrior. I actually gave him the name change in this one to warrior, just because uh that felt more true to the later games. I think
Sure.
every Final Fantasy after the first one called him warrior instead of fighter. So I did
Trying
change
to
that.
stray away from
It,
D
it
and D a little bit more too.
Yeah, I kept it called Fighter in Classic mode because there's Classic mode and Renaissance mode in this game, which Classic mode is just the original game with the bug fixes and not any of the other stuff that I added. So it's kind of just a way of sort of preserving the original, so to speak, even though it has bug
Yeah,
fixes, so it
if you want
feels
to
a
see it,
little
it's
bit different.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so the fighter or the warrior, I did give him a new job ability that he can use right off the bat, which is War Cry. That basically just boosts the whole party's physical attack damage for 2 turns.
Oh wow.
So it's an interesting like push pull with him because you have to decide, and sometimes it depends on the party composition that you have. If your party is loaded up with a bunch of heavy hitters, a bunch of just melee attackers, like you've got a monk and you've got a thief and you've got a warrior and maybe another physical attack class, like the trainer is doing a lot of physical attacks. If you put those together and it's just a really heavy hitting physical party, Warcry goes a long way because you've got at least 3 other characters besides the warrior that you can boost their attacks for the next 2 rounds, and then the warrior himself gets to take advantage of that for his next turn at least, because you're losing 1 turn to use the ability. So that's where the push pull and the sort of like choice aspect comes into play. Most people, it's counterintuitive to spend a turn with the warrior not attacking because he's so good at dealing damage, right?
Sure.
So that's where you have some of that cost effectiveness analysis of going, well, if I waste a turn, sort of, if I spend a turn not attacking to boost my attack damage, is that going to pan out over the next 2 turns? Can I make up enough damage to warrant what I to make up for what I could have dealt in this turn? So like I said, it depends on the party. If you just have a bunch of magic users, you're probably not going to be using Warcry because their attacks don't do a lot even with a boost.
Which
So
is cool in a sense, because you when you think of party composition, in the original game, it's really just like the people who are going to survive the hits and the people who are going to make everyone else survive the hits, you know, like in whatever
Hmm.
capacity. So like this, you actually think like this, you could build teams around that, and that's not something that you could say about the original game. So that's very cool.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The original game is a lot harder to play the game with certain job classes. If you don't have others, like playing through without a healer is pretty tough. You gotta just have a stack of 99 potions for every dungeon and hope that you can heal enough in a battle to get to the end. Yeah. So the new job classes definitely make you more survivable in interesting ways. Or just able to dispatch enemies more effectively to get through the battle faster. Yeah, so Warrior got Warcry, and then the promoted version, which I also name changed because it was originally Knight, where he's basically just an extra. He's a super fighter with some white magic spells, which essentially, if you think about later games in the Final Fantasy series, that's just a
Yeah,
paladin.
just
So
Paladin.
so I just called him Paladin. I just changed the Knight to Paladin in Renaissance mode, and I did get a little bit more creative with that one, and I changed his color palette as well, which is where some of my love for Final Fantasy XI comes into play because I kind of tried to color him like the Paladin from Final Fantasy XI, the online game, just to pay tribute to that one there. And so then he gets abilities like Cover that the Paladin's known for, where he can take hits for any of your other party members, or I shouldn't say any. He has to select one that he can cover at any given time, and he'll take hits for him, kind of jump in front of him in battle. So that's fun. Um, let's
So
see,
I also know that
Monk.
he has the yell ability too, which I think is hilarious.
Oh,
I did read
yeah,
about
the
that.
the
So
world the world ability is shout, and it literally does nothing but just makes this little shout sound effect, and he does like a huh, and just causes an NPC to move immediately out of his way. Which for anyone that's played the original game a bunch, you get so tired of NPCs blocking your path, especially in some of the dungeons.
truly,
And he can just make them move, which is it's just a fun, silly thing, but it can be really satisfying.
not everyone can eat the bats. So
Not everyone can eat the bats, but someone can. Yeah, yeah. That I guess we're spoilering, right? Yeah, it's yeah, the Dark Knight. Dark Knight can eat bats, and that was a fun one. So yeah, so we're jumping ahead a little bit, but Dark Knight, one of the later job classes that was added, actually one of the last two job classes that was just added in the 2.1 update, which now has been like a year, I think, since
wow.
2.1 or almost a year. But yeah, he was one of the last ones that I added, and so the later the more time has gone on, the farther I've gotten into the development of this game, the more kind of wild my ideas have started getting, I
That one
guess.
that one is wild, but what a good way
Yeah,
to use assets that are already there. Like playing Dark Knight the
exactly.
first time, I'm like, why is this bitch not leveling up his stats? Like
Yes.
what is going on? And then got to the promotion
Yeah.
part, and I can't remember if someone told you or if I read it on your Discord, and someone said make sure you go and eat those bats, and I was like, what?
Yeah,
um
what are you talking about? Because you don't get that ability until he gets the promotion,
mhm.
and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have a new world ability. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one
Yeah,
of
that
those
was a
like
fun one.
kooky, but it's, I mean, like it kind of fits. Like you
Yeah.
think Dark Knights are just kind of like what? Who knows what they're up to? Who knows what they do when they go
R-
home? Or
Well, that's the thing.
I'm
It
not gonna judge you on your diet.
thematically, yeah, thematically, I thought it fit enough because I'm playing into the whole idea that the Dark Knight is just this selfish, murderous, dark bastard,
Not Cecil,
and
basically.
yeah, yeah, like even Cecil was kind of a nice guy when he was the
He's
Dark
a
Knight,
bad
right?
Dark
But
Knight, like truly.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I had a lot of fun with that. It was funny because so now that I've got people playing the game and there's a community building around this and everything, there's always that thought, that voice in the back of my head when I'm designing something new, where it's like, well, what if people don't like it? What if people complain or something? And I was like, what are people gonna think about eating all
Eating
the bats?
bats. They're going
Especially,
to love it because it's
yeah.
collecting, right? Like it
Oh,
scratches
right.
that collecting itch.
You know what? I think that's something I've learned is you can't underestimate people's love for collecting.
So that's why
It
people
really is
love
a
blue
thing.
mages. When the Crystal Project
Mm-hmm.
guy was here, like we had a resounding like red mage, blue mage, favorite classes for me. Like they're tied, can't decide between the two of them. But it was a
Hmm.
resounding. Everybody loves collect. Like you're either I never touch the class, never want to see it, or
Yeah.
you're an avid lover of that because of the whole collection. So it's the same kind of thing. Like oh my god, all those places with the bats, I can go back and get them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all I can say is wait for the next version
Oh
because you
no.
got stuff to collect.
Oh
Yeah.
no. All right.
Stuff's coming.
Well,
Stuff's coming.
you brought up your community, and I think that's where I want to jump into the next part of the conversation as we like slowly start to wrap this up. You have a
Hmm.
super active community. They're actually really nice and really great.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm curious, for you in the development of the game, what have your interactions been like with your community? How much have they inspired what you do? How much is like, okay guys, like too much, like I appreciate it but maybe like chill a little bit? What's the balance of all of this? Because I think it's great
Yeah.
when you have that I want to interact with these people and I love their ideas, but like also this is my thing and don't get mad if I don't use them.
Right, right. Yeah, it can be challenging. So first of all, thank you to my community. Thank you to all you guys. You guys are awesome. They really, like you said, they're really nice people. It really is a great community, and I think I've gotten really lucky in that respect because I am not a micromanagey type of person. I don't, I've got a Discord server and people are in there all the time and they're chatting, and I don't feel the need to police people. I don't want to be that kind of a server. I hate, joining a Facebook group or Discord group or whatever, and the first thing you got to do is read this big wall of like, you may not do this, you may not do that, you may not do this, you may not do that, and it sounds really oppressive, and I don't like it, and I feel like if you came to the Final Fantasy Renaissance project and you joined the server because you're interested in this
You're
game,
probably at least
you're an
35 years
adult.
old. Yeah.
You're an adult. You know how to behave online. Like, just don't be a jerk. That's kind of just the rule there.
That's
Is
more for
is
the
don't be
Fire
a
Emblem
jerk.
community.
Yeah, yeah. There's lots of places to be a troll online, and we really don't have that on my server, and I really appreciate that, and we've got a few,
I can
handful of
speak to
really active
that.
members.
Like I was super
Mm,
nervous about asking questions from like a novice perspective with some of the class things, or where I was struggling a little bit playing this game that I know so well and the changes, and I thought like
yeah.
I was going to get the oh noob comment when I was asking some of those things, and honestly
Yeah,
like
no, people are
people
really
were really
receptive to
really
that.
really nice about it. So I really
Mhm.
really appreciated that, because there are a lot of
Yeah.
I get why people post the rules. Like I run my own community. My community is also very great, but I
Yeah.
want to help like foster that, because sometimes when people come in they don't necessarily know what the group intends to be. So I think like there's a
Mhm.
reason and a purpose for it. But I've also been a part of groups, or some of my Discord members have left groups and come to my group because there is a lot of like toxicity, and I feel like video game fan base is one of those where like the toxicity can be huge.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really been great so far, and we had a huge growth spike about a little over a year ago, around a year ago. It was right when I was finishing up that uh 2 2.0 release. I think I said 2.1 earlier. It's 2.0. With the last couple job classes, and right before I had finished that up and got it out, we had a really popular YouTube streamer get a hold of the game and start playing it, and overnight we just started. The Discord server exploded. I think we had 1,000 people join in 24 hours, give or
Jesus.
take. And it's just continued to grow from there, and it's kind of slowed down now, but we had quite a bit of growth, and had to kind of restructure some things to support that. But now, we've got a handful of really active people that are really helpful, and I can't thank them enough. And as far as how it impacts my work on the game, my continued development on the game, I do get a lot of inspiration and just a lot of motivation. I guess would be the better word for it. I get a ton of motivation by seeing people excited about the game. Um, there have been many times where I'm actively developing something. I'm sitting there coding on my laptop, and I just sit in my living room and pull up YouTube streams on my PS5 or something, and I'm watching people play Final Fantasy Renaissance because there's a number of people streaming it at any given time. It's still been a pretty popular game to stream, which blows my mind. It's crazy to think that this little game that I started working on for fun and for myself and maybe a few of my friends to enjoy, right? Some of my close friends. That was about all I ever expected from this. I never set out to release this, on the internet. And, I don't make any money off of this. I don't charge anything for it because I don't own the rights to the game. I'm very aware of that. So this has never been about any of that, but it's really cool to see the love for this version of the game just growing organically, and people talking about it and sharing it. And so yeah, I'll bring up YouTube and watch people play through the game while I'm working on it because it fires me up. I'm like, oh, this is so cool to see someone loving this version of the game. And sometimes I'll see things that they experience in the game where either they'll have some commentary, they're talking as they're playing and throwing out things where I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. Sometimes people come up with ideas that I incorporate in some fashion into some of the new content that I'm working on, or I'll see something that they did and I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about using that spell in that situation. That's really cool. So
I think
it's really neat stuff.
like the designers of these series really need to pay more attention to what the fans are asking. And I think that when fans see fans make games, they tend to be very supportive of it. And I think that's why the indie scene is just so strong, because it is
Mm,
basically like fans making games when
absolutely.
that starts. But I have a lot of friends in the Fire Emblem community, and there is such a big support for the fan hacks of the Fire Emblem games, because they do a lot of what Fire Emblem doesn't do anymore, and there's a lot of intentionality in the design. And that's kind of how I feel about your game, where like I'm kind of iffy about what I feel about Final Fantasy now. I am a little bit of an old fogey on what I enjoy and whatnot, and I do like my more
Mm,
traditional. So if I see someone that's like going all in on the traditional,
mm.
even if it's just like putting so much intentionality into Final Fantasy 1, I'm still there for it and going to support it, because you can tell that this is a game that someone cares so much about. So they're really going to put their heart into it, but also like listen to what other people are saying too. Like, these are the things that we also love about the Final Fantasy series and Final Fantasy 1. So like
Yeah.
I get it, and I understand like it's like great to get that appreciation, but like I also understand like why fans are like that, because like you're doing what we love, which we can trust that you're going to keep doing, as opposed to potential future installment that may have a few Final Fantasy creatures and is only Final Fantasy in name. Dot dot
Ah,
dot.
yeah. Sure, sure.
Yeah. Speaking of other games, are there any Final Fantasies in the future that you could see yourself giving the Renaissance treatment?
I've been asked this before. So I do not have any plans to do this again with any other games. I,
Three,
I
four,
don't
or
have any
five?
plans currently. So, well, honestly, okay, so perfect world, say I had, unlimited time and resources and wanted to do it. Final Fantasy 2 I think would be a good one. I think that one is ripe for a Renaissance treatment. Kind of in a similar fashion to the reasons why Final Fantasy 1 was so appealing to me, because there's so many bugs and so many things that just didn't work right, and
Mm-hmm.
I have an opportunity to fix it. Final Fantasy 2, as much as it's become very famous among fans for the way that the leveling system worked, where you level up
I
each
love
of your
it.
stats
I love it. I
differently.
don't know why people will be
Yeah.
upset about that, but then they'll go play the new Romancing Saga game or Skyrim. And it's like,
Mm.
oh, okay, so like when
It's
Final
kind of the
Fantasy 2
same.
did
Yeah.
it in the 80s,
Yeah.
you were mad
Yeah.
about it.
Let's all go play Skyrim and just hide behind a box
When
and get our
Oblivion and
stealth skill up.
Skyrim does it, like you're
Yeah.
okay with it? Like I don't get
Right.
it.
Yeah, I mean, it has some flaws. It's
Yeah.
this happens throughout the series. Like Final Fantasy VIII had that bizarre design decision that they made, and I don't know if it was an oversight or what, if they didn't realize people would exploit it, but you could get through the entire game just running from battles and throwing grenades at bosses because everything levels up to scale with you.
I thought you were going
So
for the
there's
junctioning system. I didn't even know you were going for the level
Oh
the scaling
no, no, no.
system.
Well, the junctioning system, yeah, that was flawed too. There's a number of issues with with FF8. Yeah, I should probably not get into that. I don't want to get into the FF8 debate. We know how those
Spoiler,
could
you
go,
might
but
be on our Final Fantasy episode when we start our next
yeah,
season, but when we get
yeah. All
there.
right, let's do it. Yeah, no, I do have a lot of thoughts about the games, but I love them all for the most part, except Final Fantasy Legend 2 on the Game Boy. I'll never play that game again, but I do love most of them.
Okay,
Oh
yeah,
no, I see your face.
we'll put that one in the bank. We're banking that one.
Only Legend 2, Legend 1 and 3 were great.
Yeah,
Legend 2, terrible
my
experience.
face is still like what? But we'll save it. So
That's the
so
only
there
one
are
I did not like.
there are
Uh,
no plans right now,
no
fans,
plans right
for
now.
and you again respect Osmo
Yeah.
for that too, because I mean like
Well,
you don't make money off like this is passion
no.
project.
Well, and that's yeah, and so that's a big part of it. So knowing what I know now after making Final Fantasy Renaissance, how much time it took. Like I literally started working on this game, I think it was August of 2015. I'm still working on it. So I didn't have version 1.0 ready and done until January of 2021, I think it was. So that's like a solid like 5.5 years almost, or four and a
Jeez.
half years
So basically
of
COVID.
working on this. Right. Yeah. I mean, COVID, I got a lot done during COVID,
Yeah.
that's for sure. But I already just, all of my spare time was going to this game, and it's still a lot of my spare time goes to this game, and it's been like that for years now. It's almost like I don't know what to do with my spare time otherwise if I'm not working on this game, which is a little bit sad maybe.
I don't
But
honestly, but you think of what people do in their spare time, or like as long as you're maintaining healthy and you're still playing games for yourself, I think
sure.
it's good to have a project. There are some people that just like have nothing. So I think like if
Right.
like this is where you want to put your energy, you are doing something that is making an impact, and that is great. Like I think
Oh,
that
and
it,
I love it.
yeah.
I legitimately love
I don't
working
think
on
it's
it
sad. I
still.
wouldn't say it's
But
sad at all. Yeah.
okay, okay, but it was a very educational experience to learn how much actually goes into something like this, because you think, and there are some developers that do way more. Like there are solo developers like me that make some amazing games, and they blow my mind constantly with how much they're able to do. Some of them can do the whole thing. I'm not as much of an artist as I am a programmer. That's really my bread and butter. Some people can do it all. They can design the music, the art, the
Don't you just want
programming,
to hit those
everything, and it's
people? I want to hit those people.
it's impressive and it's humbling. But this game it really took a lot more than I anticipated. I'm just not the kind of person to ever give up on a project. So, there've been some really rough spots where I'm like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this. Like I've had some design challenges where I'm like, I don't know the solution. And my wife, like constantly, she just says the same thing every time. She's like, you'll figure it out. You always do. And I somehow I figure it out. I pour over internet forums and look to Reddit and stuff like that, and Stack Overflow, and try to find resources to figure things out. And some of it I have to figure out on my own. Like some of the challenges I've run into working on this game are things that I have not seen online other people posting about, and I've had to figure out. And that's the tough stuff, and that's the parts where it gets discouraging. And when you don't have anyone else to rely on, when you don't have a team, it can be really hard. And sometimes you have to take breaks and step away.
So
But
you're speaking true to my heart right now, again, being on my own like dev journey, coming in raw, because I mean like I was an English teacher in high school, you know what I mean? I have a math background too, but like I don't have, aside from one coding class in college, I don't really have a big base coding knowledge. So coming in to something like this can be really daunting. So I'm curious, like for
mhm.
you, I know you had experience doing this, but what advice do you have for people who want to do this? Because I feel like we're kind of dancing around this already. I know part of it is
Hmm.
just like take time and get through, but what else would you want people to know
Okay, yeah. So for
on
anyone
a,
that
on
wants
a,
to
on a
do something
solo
like
journey,
this,
not a
yeah,
team one?
Yeah. Well, the first advice I would give anyone who wants to do this stuff, especially by themselves, um, I mean, get a background, develop your skills and learn a little bit about whatever it is you want to do. So if you want to, well, I mean, if you're a solo dev, you pretty much have to be a programmer. That's where I started. So I took programming classes in college. It's not like I don't even have a degree in this stuff. I studied graphic design before this, but like I said, I don't even consider myself as much of an artist as I do a programmer. My programming experience really just started with a couple classes that I took in college. And then after that, I ended up I knew I wanted to make games, so I joined a game development organization. They're actually at least nationwide. I don't know if they're around the world, but International Game Developers Association. They have chapters all around the country.
Cool.
I'm in Arizona, and I joined the chapter in Arizona in my area and started just going to meetings and meeting other game developers. It's just other indie game developers, basically. And I went to some game jams, which, if you're not familiar, a game
Hmm.
jam is basically like you go to a college campus, usually, or maybe a library or something. I don't know, but or could be a person's house, but like they organize these things where groups of people get together. You split off into whatever smaller groups you want to find other people. Like, I'm a programmer. Maybe I need an artist and I need a sound designer and stuff like that. Maybe another programmer because there's a lot of code to write. And you form a team and you just basically like lock yourself in a room for like 48 hours. It's like a weekend. And you crank out whatever you can. There's usually a theme and some sort of like, rules and stuff that you have to follow.
I heard
And you
people learn
just,
a lot from those because like
yeah,
the time limit on it
yeah.
really like
You're
makes you,
really
yeah.
forced to just like streamline your processes, and like whatever ideas you have in the beginning, you're going to say, well, there's no way that we can accomplish that in this limited amount of time. So you really are forced to simplify your ideas and make it things that you know are actionable, and you can achieve those within the time limit. It's really a great learning experience. So that was really like my first game design stuff that I did was in that capacity. I went to a couple game jams, worked with some other devs, learned a lot of cool tricks and software, programs and stuff that they used. That was really helpful. And then beyond that, like I said, I worked with a team on that Crystal Catacombs game for about a year, a couple years, something like that. It's just been a slow process of, just networking with other people that know a little bit about this stuff in one capacity or another and getting some tips. And I've been fortunate because I'm a very good self teacher and self
Hmm.
learner. I'm just wired that way, I guess. I can motivate myself to figure things out on my own. I don't know if everyone's like that, but
Yeah,
that was
there are
my
so many different ways of learning. I know like I come from the background where I don't do well with a small base knowledge, so the classroom structure for me works really well. Like I super
yeah.
flourish. And then once I get to that modern level, I can fuck around and find out. But if you're just kind of like,
Yeah.
here's a program, figure it out, that like
Yeah.
doesn't fly for me. So
That's the
everyone
thing. I
everyone
think a
has their
lot
own,
of
yeah.
and I think a lot of people are like that. I think a lot of people, if they don't know what they don't know, they need someone to tell them. They need someone to give them that basic structure. That's where a classroom setting is really useful, really
Hmm.
helpful. But I would never tell anybody to go to like a game design school and like spend all that money and like get some formal degree or something like that. Like if that works for you and you can afford to do that, sure. If that's the environment that you need to become educated and to learn skills and everything, if you need that guidance, absolutely.
And maybe
But
if you want to apply to like some of the big companies too, like that could help. But if you're
sure,
just
and
doing
that
your
would probably look good on a resume.
if you're
Sure,
doing your own game, there are just so many
yeah,
like I like in my journey, there are just so many free resources teaching you
absolutely,
how to do it.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and like I said, I kind of came about this just learning different things here and there, and when I finally fell into learning Unity, which is the program that I used to make this game and a couple games now. Um, that was so appealing to me because, like you said, there's so many resources online that are free, and Unity tutorial videos are all over the place. It's so
Millions
easy
of
to get your
them.
hands on you know tutorials that will teach you how to do this stuff. And I literally only used a single tutorial video about how to make a very basic platforming shooter game, just to get the basic understanding of how the Unity environment was structured, how
Hmm.
to, create a script, apply it to a game object, make it move, stuff like that. And that was it. And then other than that, it's just been, I took that experience, worked on a game with a team of people where I could, kind of rely on some of them to help me occasionally as we were going to. And then it's this game. That's really it. So it's you're always going to be learning. So I would say, my advice to people beyond just learning some basic skills like coding and you know tutorial videos on a game design environment like Unity, um, if you're recreating a game like I did with this one, pick a game that you know and love so much that you're not going to want to kill yourself if you're still working on it 5 years later or 8 years later.
You never want to touch
Um,
that series again.
yeah, it really, like, just if you take the time to really like think about it in the beginning and make sure you pick the right project, I think that's key to finishing, because I think too many times people will dive into something, and how many times have you started a project and given up on it because maybe that wasn't the right project for you. You have to pick the right project, and for me this game was a perfect fit.
Cool. I think that's all sage advice too. I think like more people can do this than they probably think they can. I know, fortunately, like I
Oh,
found some
sure.
tutorials that are really like laying things out for me exactly how I need it, which lets me dabble a
Hmm.
lot more. But I think sticking with it and being patient is kind of the biggest advice. But
Yeah, and knowing
oh,
that there's going to be tough spots and you're going to want to take breaks, and there's going to be times when like you hate what you're doing, or you question why are you spending so much time on this. I've gone through that so many times. I can't even tell you. And
that's just life,
you
right? Like
know
I think anything that you
that
work on, that they
is that
work hard
is
on, it's going to happen. Whether that's a book,
absolutely, there's going to
music,
be ebbs and
yeah.
flows, and you have to embrace that and understand that that's part of the process, and you're not going to get it done overnight. It's incremental changes that eventually will build something great.
Well, speaking of building something great, let's wrap up our talk on Final Fantasy Renaissance. And I think I want to hear from you. I think I know the answer a little bit, but I'm curious. Are we nearing the end of this world of Renaissance for Final Fantasy 1, or is there still more to come beyond what's imminent?
Well, my plan from pretty early on when I started adding new job classes was I created a spreadsheet and I put all the classes that I could think of that seemed distinct enough throughout the Final Fantasy series. Any
Mhm.
job class that appeared in the other games in the series was kind of on my hit list of things that I wanted to include. I came up with a list of 30 unique job
Ooh.
classes. So that includes the original six. So the original six plus 24 more was my goal. I'll call it like a stretch goal to potentially have all of those. I think I can do it. It's time consuming, and the longer I'm doing this, the less opportunity I have to work on something new, which I've been itching to do for a while. I really do want to work on an original project, but I still have too many unresolved like ideas just floating around in the back of my head to be ready to really dive into that yet. So at the moment, I'm still plugging away on Final Fantasy Renaissance. I'm still, making little tweaks and adding new job classes. We've got Spellblade and Archer coming out very soon. I'm actively working on getting the last little finishing touches on those guys done, and then those will be released with version
Super excited for
2.1.
those. Very, very exciting.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what people think. I hope that they like them. I hope they're fun. I will tell you, you're first to hear it. Those two job classes I think have been some of the most challenging
Ooh.
that I've tried to implement in this game so far, because, like I mentioned earlier, within the constraints of Final Fantasy 1 and how the battle system works and just how the game mechanics work, there's certain things about some of the job classes in later games that are really hard to fit into those limitations. Something like Spellblade, that their bread and butter is adding elemental attributes to their weapon attacks and stuff like that. And in the original game, how many enemies have really significant elemental weaknesses? Do you know what their elemental weaknesses even are? Things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
then if you look at like the way that the original game works currently with weapons like the flame sword, all it really does is it adds 4 points of damage to your regular attacks if that enemy
So
happens to be weak to fire, stuff like that. So
basically nothing.
yeah, so trying to make an entire job class built around that sort of mechanic, I had to get a little bit creative with it. And same thing with Archer. This is a ranged class, technically, quote unquote, ranged class. That in most of the games that means something. In Final Fantasy One, there's no front row, there's no back row, and I didn't want to try to implement
Oh
stuff like
God,
that and
no.
significantly change how the battle system works. So I had to come up with other ways to make it feel like a unique class without relying on pretty much what you think of as the first thing for what an archer does in a Final Fantasy game. So I think they're fun. I've been having a lot of fun with them, and I hope other people will like them too. But yeah, so that's on the horizon, and then I think that brings us up to what, a total of 18. I think it's 18 job classes that'll be total.
Is
Once
it
those guys
safe?
come out.
Is it safe to say? Well, I mean, and obviously, I know you are one. You like keeping things close to your heart, which I respect and appreciate in terms of like the secrets in the future. But is it safe to say that if you just kind of pay attention to the different potential classes in the series, then you know what the rest of them could be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I have people ask all the time, or throw out ideas like, "What about this class? What about this class?" And I try not to respond because like I replied to a lot of them in the beginning, and I would basically be like, "Yeah, it's on my list. It's on my list. It's on my list. I've already thought of that."
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Dad.
Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to like sound like I'm condescending or trying to shoot people down. Like
Right.
yeah, those are great ideas. I did think of it. Trust me. Like it's just going to take time, but yeah, my kind of rule of thumb for what classes I've picked to put in, because like you're not going to see every single thing that you've seen in a Final Fantasy game necessarily get the Renaissance treatment in this game, but my rule of thumb is if it's a distinct enough class, that it serves a purpose, that it has its own unique role. Like for instance, I always use this as an example. I already have a blue mage in Final Fantasy Renaissance. So you're not likely to see something like Pictomancer, which was Realm's job ability in Final Fantasy VI,
Because what would it
or
do? And then like you probably don't
yeah,
want to feel like you're ripping too much from 14 either, right? You want to make it your
sure.
own original spin. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
I don't and to be honest, I don't know too much about 14 because that's one I haven't played. I played the hell out of Final Fantasy 11. I've been playing that game for like 20 years. I haven't touched it in a little bit, but I only have time for one MMO. I don't I
Yeah,
haven't had time to
they're
dive into another one, but I know that they recently added or are adding the Pictomancer job
mhm.
class to 14, and I read about how it works and I'm like, "Okay, well that's kind of cool." And there's some things that it does that are a little bit different from just monster abilities, right? They have like environmental things that they do, but then that starts sounding like Geomancer. So this is where I have to go, well, I already have a blue mage, I already have a geomancer. I don't feel the need to have a job class that's kind of just like a little bit of both. Um, so yeah, if it's a job class that
like
really seems to
distinct.
stand on its own. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like I can tell you like just off the top of my head some really easy grabs would be things like samurai.
Yeah, that's
That's
what
on
I
the
was that's
list.
what I was thinking of for sure.
Chemist, that's on the list, things like that. So they stand apart enough. They do their own thing.
Well, you heard it here first. Chemist, samurai, future.
Yeah,
It'll
yeah. Oh,
happen.
Chemist has been on my short list for a little while. I'm thinking, and again, first time I've really said this publicly, but I'm thinking about doing some sort of a poll maybe after this next release.
Oh, people
And
fans go crazy over polls. That
I
sounds like a
don't
good
know if I'll put
idea.
my
Yeah.
whole list of job class ideas in there, but I'm thinking about giving people a short list and then letting them pick from that for which ones I actually work on next. So we'll see. I tend to choose normally, like in the past so far, I've chosen whatever job classes I work on next based on just what I'm most excited to see in the game. Usually I just have an itch to make a specific
Yeah.
job
Oh
class,
yeah.
but I think that'd be a good way to give something back to the community and let people get a little bit more involved.
Well, Osmo, we are officially at the end of our episode. I super want to thank you for being here and for making this game. I love playing it. It's so much fun. Like, if young Patrick had known that this wonderful experience was going to be coming like 30 plus years later from when he originally played the game, he'd be like, the future is beautiful and bright. Like all, there's nothing to worry about because people will like keep going with Final Fantasy. I just thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm really glad that you've enjoyed it. I didn't get to ask you what were some of your favorite things or favorite moments in Final Fantasy Renaissance.
Oh,
I'm
blue
curious.
mage.
Yeah.
Blue mage. And then this time playthrough Fief going through and
Hunting all those
hiding
items.
hunting all of the items. I thought the
Hmm.
dancer was a lot of fun. I thought like just the little side questy nature of some of the later abilities, but just re-experiencing the game with new classes it's just, I replay Final Fantasy games all the time. Like just it's good anxiety management for me. I think Final
Oh
Fantasy
yeah.
6 I've played every year since
Mm.
the first time I played it. So like since I was 8, 9. Um but anytime there's an experience to go back and try someone's cool spin on it, and like, and there's a different like incorporations of new classes, curated abilities, all kinds of things like that. Like that is just the joy. So technically it's all of it, but the answer is blue mage. Like it just going through the blue mage is so much fun.
Oh, good. And he was the first one that I added to because I
Easy
thought he would be
easy
the
pick.
easiest. I said, the monster abilities are already here. Let me
Yep,
just, call them spells and
easy
have him learn
pick.
them. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you again. We'll have you on this season for sure. Or if you ever want to do other little side episodes, if you're itching, like, hey, I just replayed this RPG. Do you want to be an episode or do an episode? I'll be like, hell yes, I do. Come on, let's do it.
Yeah. Oh, I dream of having time to play new games. It's few and far between these days, but
There's so
yeah.
long.
I'm gonna have to take a break after I release this next update. I'm itching to play some stuff. I got a backlog to catch up on.
I don't think anybody would be mad if you do. So all right. Well, we want to thank you all for listening. We'd love to hear your comments. If you leave any comments on the video, I will definitely pass them on to Ozmo in terms of like things that you're thinking out. You can join Ozmo's community. Is it just Final Fantasy Renaissance Discord? Is that right?
Final Fantasy Renaissance Project should be the name on Discord.
Renaissance
And
Project on
if
Discord.
you go to finalfantasyrenaissance.com, that you
You have
can
a
just
very
scroll
nice
down.
website. You have a very
Oh,
nice
thank you.
website. Yeah, that was
Thank you.
easy. That was cool with seeing that the first time clicking on that. Or you can join my Discord too, and we have conversations about RPGs all the time. But we want to thank you all for listening. Now go out there and get gaming.